Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. I'm Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and in this episode, you're going to hear a digest version of several articles. We've done some digest episodes in the past, but in this particular case, all of the articles come from the same special issue of the journal Investigations in Mathematics Learning. Investigations in Mathematics Learning is published by Taylor and Francis, and it comes from the Research Council on Mathematics Learning. The current editor is Jonathan Bostic at Bowling Green State University. For this episode, we're going to focus on Volume 13, Issue 1 of IML, which is a special issue put together by Megan Che, Carlos Nicolas Gomez, and Dennis Comby. The issue focuses on critical perspectives of racialized identities within social justice and equity in mathematics teaching and learning. There are 4 research articles in the special issue, and I invited the authors to provide a summary of the work in their own voice. So what you'll hear next is Frances Harper describing her work with Eryn Maher and Hyunyi Jung. Their article is entitled Whiteness as a Stumbling Block in Learning to Teach Mathematics for Social Justice. Then Christopher Jett will summarize his article, The Qualms and Quarrels with Online Undergraduate Mathematics, the Experiences of African American Male STEM Majors. Next, I will summarize an article that's by Jemimah Jung and Jahneille Cunningham, entitled Repositioning Black Girls in Mathematics Disposition Research, New Perspectives from QuantCrit. And finally, Teresa Dunleavy will talk about her study with Alison Marzocchi and Maisie Gholson, entitled Teacher Candidates Silhouettes, Supporting Mathematics Teacher Identity Development in Secondary Mathematics Methods Courses.
This is Frances Harper from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I will be summarizing Whiteness as a Stumbling Block in Learning to Teach Mathematics for Social Justice, which I wrote together with Eryn Maher from Georgia Southern University and Hyunyi Jung from the University of Florida. So in this article, we use a framework for whiteness in mathematics education that was proposed by Dan Beatty and Luis Leiva in 2016 to follow 2 early career teachers, Diana and Olivia, into the classroom following a summer professional development in which they attempted to integrate social justice topics into mathematics lessons in their classrooms. So I don't have time to give you a lot of details about those lessons in particular, but what I want to talk about is the way in which whiteness in particular was acting in this instantiation of these lessons to kind of shape the actions and decisions that teachers were making to disrupt whiteness and also to perpetuate it. So just so we're all on the same page, we define whiteness as the ideologies that value one racial group, in particular the white racial group, over others. And so we see this playing out in mathematics education through the broader systems, structures, discourses, and ideologies that sort of shape what happens in classrooms, so that Black and brown students continue to be marginalized in mathematics, even when their teachers might be making efforts and taking steps towards being more inclusive, equitable, and just. And so we looked closely at Diana and Olivia's sort of motivation to integrate social justice topics into their classroom and some of the motivation behind the choices that they made as they tried to balance the mathematical goals for lessons with the social justice goals for lessons, and then some of the decisions that they made in practice as they were trying to enact these lessons in their classroom. So in the motivation that Diana and Olivia had for integrating social justice topics into their math lessons, we saw that they were challenging some of the ways that whiteness operates to create an organizational logic for mathematics as something that is disconnected from the lived experiences of Black and brown students. And we see both Jett's case study, where we hear from Black men who talk about as STEM majors, I think it's really important that math is connected to their chosen career path. But we also know from Jung and Cunningham's QuantCrit analysis that utility in mathematics alone, right, as career or everyday life connections is not enough in order for Black girls, in particular in Jung and Cunningham's article, to engage in and pursue mathematics. And so we saw both Olivia and Diana's decisions to integrate particular social justice topics into their mathematics lesson, kind of aligning with what we see in Jett's and Jung and Cunningham's study. So both Diana and Olivia prioritized social justice topics that they thought their students would have emotional connections to. And so we see this as really disrupting the way that mathematics is typically disconnected from the lived experiences of Black and Brown students, because Black and Brown students rarely have opportunities to process or exhibit emotions in mathematics classrooms. And so that limiting of emotional responses, especially when students encounter something that is unfair or unjust, acts as a mechanism of whiteness because it requires students to engage in additional emotional labor that white students may not have to do in the same space. And so Olivia and Diana wanted to create a space for those emotional connections that could directly impact students' interest or identification in mathematics, which Jung and Cunningham describe nicely in their article. But we saw in trying to bring in these topics that students were really emotionally connected to, that certain tensions arose, right, for Diana and Olivia, and the actions and decisions that they made at time perpetuated the operation of whiteness in mathematics education. And so in Diana's case, we saw that as she was really prioritizing the emotional connection that students had to the topic, and so inadvertently devalued the cognitive labor that they were doing. And so we see how even teachers who are committed to equity and social justice might inadvertently impact negatively Black and Brown students' perceptions of themselves in mathematics. And I think Jung and Cunningham nicely sort of amplify how important this is, given that even when Black girls have strong self-efficacy, right, if they don't have a strong mathematics identity, they might choose to not continue pursuing or engaging in mathematics. And then for Olivia, again, we saw her kind of prioritizing a social justice topic with a strong mathematical connection, but at the same time, she made decisions to try to keep those emotional connections limited by focusing on kind of some distant others in students' responses to the unfair situations that they were exploring through the mathematics. And so there was this expectation of responding in more of a calm, disconnected, and logical way, which could force students to minimize and manage their emotional responses in mathematics classrooms. And so this continues to perpetuate the idea that mathematics is a space, right, where logic is the most important thing and there's no place for emotion. And that continues to devalue, right, ways of knowing that might be more valuable for students given their racial or ethnic identities. And so we make a final connection to some of the work that Dunleavy and her colleagues are doing in the tools that they provide to help teachers understand sort of who they are, not just as teachers, but in relation to the institutionalized space of mathematics as a white space. And so one thing that, as I was reading the articles, was really striking to me was the white woman teacher of color who shared in her internal message in this silhouette about how equity isn't possible without a system overhaul. And so I'm going to close by kind of emphasizing that, and again saying that the ways in which teaching math for social justice continues to perpetuate the marginalization of Black and Brown children and students is not the fault of any one individual teacher, because individual teachers alone cannot disrupt systemic equities, and so these tensions will continue to persist. But there are ways that we can better help teachers to understand how their actions and decisions may continue to perpetuate whiteness, or alternatively to disrupt the mechanisms of whiteness that are operating in classroom spaces, so that teachers can learn to play this game, as Gutierrez talks about, even as they attempt to change it. And so one promising shift that we see is that in the literature around teaching math for social justice, there's been a lot of emphasis on balancing social justice goals with mathematics goals. And we think a shift towards thinking about how to balance the cognitive and emotional labor that students are being asked to do when they connect social justice topics to mathematics topics could better prepare teachers to teach mathematics for social justice in ways that disrupt the operation of whiteness in mathematics.
This is Christopher Jett from the University of West Georgia, and I will be summarizing the Qualms and Quarrels with online undergraduate mathematics, the experiences of African American male STEM majors. My article features an institutional case study that examines 10 African American male STEM majors' undergraduate mathematics experiences from a critical race theoretical perspective. This qualitative study is timely given the contemporary discussions about 1. Critical race theory, 2. Equitable practices in undergraduate mathematics education, and 3. Online courses, hybrid-style courses, and the like. The participants identified as African American men had completed the calculus sequence and had maintained a 3.0 GPA in their respective STEM majors. The institution is an urban research university located in the Southeast, and it is nationally known for graduating large numbers of African American students. I must add that this institutional case study comes from a larger project funded by the National Science Foundation's career program that examines black men's mathematics experiences across 4 different types of higher educational institutions. As it relates to the findings, 2 overarching findings are reported in the article. First, the reform model regarding these online pedagogical features did not work best for these black men. The online components included spending instructional time in a computer lab, completing homework assignments in the lab, and taking exams and quizzes in the lab. The participants expressed that this computer-based method of learning was not ideal for learning mathematics concepts at a higher cognitive level. The second theme was that minor connections were made to STEM fields. The participants shared that they expected more connections between the mathematics content and their STEM programs of study. Based on these findings, 2 implications emanated from the study. The first takeaway was that pedagogy and core mathematics courses at this institution, namely college algebra, college trigonometry, and pre-calculus, needs to be improved. These courses are often viewed as terminal courses, but the participant used the concepts learned in these core mathematics courses to later successfully complete the calculus sequence. Therefore, those of us involved in undergraduate mathematics education must be careful not to discount the STEM talent sitting in those introductory level mathematics courses. The second takeaway was that the participants did not prefer online mathematics learning. Similar to the implication that black girls need differentiated approaches to improve their STEM pathways, as mentioned in Drs. Jung and Cunningham's article, this study suggests that differentiated approaches are needed within undergraduate mathematics contexts for African American male students. There are also theoretical connections between these articles, and that they both use critical race theory. And my article speaks directly to critical race theory's interest convergence tenet and how it operates with respect to reform efforts in undergraduate mathematics education for black men. In closing, this study emphasizes the need to solicit African American male students' viewpoints about their mathematics learning. Examining this institution's graduation data alone could give the impression that the core mathematics courses are working for these black male students. But this study's data suggests otherwise. This study also underscores the need to use critical frameworks when exploring reform efforts for minoritized groups at the undergraduate level. In the end, my hope is that this study yields effective models and practices that improve black men's mathematics learning outcomes so that they can achieve their STEM goals.
To make sure that the next article from the issue is included in this podcast, I'm going to provide my own summary of it. I apologize because I certainly won't do as good of a job as the authors themselves would have, but I think we can all understand that people are very busy these days, and so I'm going to do my best to provide an overview, and then I hope you all can go grab the article itself from Investigations in Mathematics Learning. So the article is titled, Repositioning Black Girls in Mathematics Disposition Research, New Perspectives from QuantCrit. It's by Jemimah Jung from Texas A&M University, and also Jahneille Cunningham from UCLA. This article focuses on black girls in school, and it's motivated by the dual marginalization that exists for black girls, who have to face racial bias as well as gender bias. And this dual marginalization shows up not only in STEM professions, where they're underrepresented, but also in their school experiences. So Jung and Cunningham wanted to give particular attention to Black girls, and they used the opportunity propensity framework from Burns and Miller. This framework includes antecedent factors, which are broad systemic factors like racial bias and sexism, and they're pervasive, but they aren't deterministic at the individual level. There are also opportunity factors, like curricula and the teachers that a student has. And then there are propensity factors, which are students' individual characteristics, like their math disposition. Quoting from the article, Jung and Cunningham used this study to, quote, examine the mathematics dispositions of Black girls to increase understanding of their beliefs about mathematics and how these dispositions impact their STEM attainment, end quote. And that's from page 34. And they drew upon Lopez and colleagues' approach of QuantCrit, bringing critical race theory together with quantitative analysis. The quantitative data came from the high school longitudinal study of 2009 to 2012, and they focused on the 1,707 Black girls who were in that data set. The scales of interest for Jung and Cunningham were the math disposition scales, which include math efficacy, math interest, math identity, and math utility. Details of the analysis can be found in the article, but the main idea is that they used K-means cluster analysis to identify natural subgroups within the math disposition data from the Black girls. These resulting clusters or groups would represent different math dispositions that are distinct in some meaningful way. And Jung and Cunningham did find 4 math disposition subgroups among the 1,700 Black girls. Thankfully, out of the 4 subgroups, the subgroup with the most negative math disposition was also the smallest subgroup. The developing cluster, as they called it, encompassed about 17% of the participants, and it featured negative math identity, negative views on math utility, and negative math interest. Interestingly, this cluster still had a positive sense of self-efficacy, meaning that these Black girls feel like they can do math, but they're simply not interested in it and they don't really see the value of it. The next group is called the capable cluster, which is 25%, and it involves a negative interest level and a negative math utility, but that's paired with a positive math identity and positive self-efficacy. So these Black girls are capable and view themselves as math people, but they still aren't really interested in pursuing math or STEM careers. Jung and Cunningham note that if there were more Black women in STEM careers, then it might help these Black girls turn their math identity into math interest. They also talk about possible out-of-school programs to build more interest for this cluster. Next is the largest subgroup, the potential cluster, which has 32% of those participants. These girls had positive self-efficacy in math and also had a positive view of math utility. So those are some good ingredients for pursuing STEM opportunities. But the potential cluster also had negative math identities and negative math interest. This cluster being relatively large is kind of surprising because past research with general populations of students showed a link usually between positive math utility and math interest. If people think math is a useful sort of subject, they usually are kind of interested in it. But in this study of Black girls particularly, they saw the math utility, but that did not translate directly into interest. So this might be a case where it's important to consider the unique perspectives of Black girls, because for those in this cluster, seeing the utility of math does not necessarily mean that they're personally interested in pursuing it. Okay, and the final group, coming in at about 25%, was the ideal cluster, which was characterized by positive math dispositions across the board, positive identity, positive self-efficacy, positive interest, and positive views on the utility of math. This ideal cluster was 25% of the Black girls in the study, but the actual representation of Black women in STEM fields is substantially lower than 25%. So Jung and Cunningham call for more research to understand the experiences of this ideal cluster. And overall, with this study, they're highlighting the importance of recognizing the diversity and nuance of Black girls' experiences in mathematics. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach that will improve their pathways to STEM success.
Hi, everyone. everyone. My name is Teresa Dunleavy, and I'm going to talk with you about an article that I wrote with my two amazing co-authors, Alison Marzocchi, who's at California State Fullerton, and Maisie Gholson, who is at the University of Michigan. And at the time that we wrote this, I was at Vanderbilt University at Peabody College, and I'm now currently transitioning to Antioch University in Seattle. So the article is called Teacher Candidates Silhouettes Supporting Mathematics Teacher Identity Development in Secondary Mathematics Methods Courses. Across our conversations, my conversations with Dr. Marzocchi and Dr. Gholson, we were just really curious about the ways that our students were learning how to be mathematics teachers and middle and high school mathematics teachers, and how they were making sense of their own identity as they did that. Did they pay attention to their own gender and racial identity in our case? Did they pay attention to those particular elements of their identity as they thought about how they were being teachers? Did they find that to be relevant? And so we decided to study across our three institutions, we decided to study our methods courses. And of course, this looks slightly different at any single institution. And so whatever was the case for us and how our teacher candidates engaged in learning to teach mathematics, we came together and said, we are going to have a suite of 3 common activities that we're going to do in these methods courses. And then we're going to study what we learn from our teacher candidates engaging in those 3 activities. We felt that it was really important to understand how our teacher candidates were processing their understanding about issues of their identity, about issues of teaching mathematics, and about our commitment to teaching toward equity, teaching toward justice-oriented classrooms. And we wanted to know, with all that we say and do in class, what does it mean for our candidates to make sense of what that looks like in practice? And we think this is really related to Dr. Jung and Dr. Cunningham's study on repositioning Black girls, and Dr. Harper and colleagues' study on whiteness, because ultimately a question I've been thinking about a lot lately is, as math teacher educators, how do we support teacher candidates either to work to perpetuate whiteness or to dismantle it? In our study, we found that as our candidates engaged in the suite of activities, they engaged reflexively, or what Archer calls bending back, between the subject of mathematics teaching and learning and themselves as people who either perpetuate systems of oppression or work to dismantle them. We found that at times, teacher candidates embraced their intersectional identities. At times, they engaged in thoughtful conversations about their gender, their race, and other aspects of their identity. At times, they reflected on what they had learned from the past and how that might impact what they'll do in the future. And at times, they discussed the importance of having these conversations about themselves as they thought about learning to teach mathematics. Our hope for this work is that as math teacher educators, we will continue to facilitate opportunities for teacher candidates to confront how their identities work to support their students' mathematics learning.